Welcome, everyone. This is actually the 10th webinar in Educators Living in the Joy of Gratitude. You know, we're doing something unusual here because we're bringing together many experts and in a field where we didn't necessarily realize in a clear way that there are so many people that have been doing significant things with the principles for a number of years. There are a couple of things that I wanted to visit about in the beginning of this particular session before you have the wonderful opportunity of meeting Deb Bell, who's exceptional. The first is that we know from how these 9 sessions up to this point have flowed that two of the most individual figures who have caused the principles to be possible to integrate into schools have been clearly Sid Banks and then a student of his by the name of Roger Mills. And I'm saying this for an important reason, because in any movement, in any development of a body of knowledge and a history of experience, we know that the learning is passed, I'm going to say, from one generation to another. It doesn't matter what field you talk about. And as that passing from one teacher to another goes on and on, I like to talk about rings of where we stand in the transmission of the principles into education. So let me be a little bit focused on the history that has so far evolved in this webinar series. We started with Barbost, Krista Campsell, and we actually at a certain point had you, Marika, presenting. And they are representatives who were the first to learn the principles from Sid Banks and bring it into education. And then there were many of us who really had extremely limited opportunity, financially, geographically, organizationally, to have the luxury of meeting the originator of this teaching. Said, I could travel to Salt Spring maybe once or twice in my professional career. And I had far more access to teaching opportunities, trainings, workshops in the US. Clearly, my agency, my grants allowed that. International travel was a no-no. So what naturally has happened is that we have what I'm going to call rings of educators who learned at different places in different periods of time. And that meant that as people learned, and I think this is true universally, that I'm not overstating it to say that people have a great appreciation for whoever the individual is that introduced them to the gift of the principles. And that appreciation takes many, many forms. But for the most part, it means that we were comfortable learning from someone. And we saw changes in our own lives. And I don't care if you're talking about mental health professionals, business professionals, it's part of the reality of growing and understanding in the world. So when I talk about there being kind of two primary, big, frequently experienced teachers of the principles for educators, there really was Sid Banks, who prepared others, and then some of those others went out to prepare others, and I got into it at third ring. if you look at the chronological history of the principles, Sid was doing his earliest work in the mid-70s. Is that right, Marika? You just nod your head. Mid-70s. And then, as Roger Mills, in what I think was probably the early 80s, maybe a little bit of the late 70s, traveled to Salt Springs, he encountered Sid. And certainly there were others. I don't mean to minimize, but for simplicity's sake, we would say Roger was first string, or I don't mean Roger, Sid was first string, and his first students would have been those who lived right in the Salt Spring, Vancouver area. And then there is what I call second ring, people coming from farther away, Roger, George Pransky, a whole bunch of people. But Roger happened to be one who, more than almost any other in that second ring, brought the principles directly into schools. He was a community psychologist, but he went into schools because they were part of a community. So naturally, there's a difference between how those who learned directly in the early days from Sid learned the principles in the formless way that Barb and Krista and Marika talk about it and value it. And those of us that were learning third ring, halfway through, in a sense, the chronological history of the three principles, were learning third generation. And it happened that was strongly presented in the context of the understanding of how human beings operate psychologically. And for a variety of reasons, simply in education, in psychology, there was not, I'm going to say, professional safety or professional support for even broaching what was spiritual. So historically, as things get passed on and disseminated out, there is a view that comes with each of those rings, okay? When we're talking to Deb Bell today, she represents fourth ring. That's not very far from Sid in one way. And luckily, people from all of those rings are still living today. And in this webinar, we brought together the original learners who took this into education. And Barb would have been, in her webinar, very clear to say something so important. She said, the words that we use do not matter. Sid said that. And she said that prerequisite to anything successful in education was the educator understanding in their own lives how the principles operate. And Marika gave us a huge message that we are the principles. Human beings are the principles. The three principles as a body of teaching is a description of how those principles operate in us. And depending on who we learn from, we talk about it in different ways. And also in some ways, in similar ways. What's unique about this webinar series is that we've had the opportunity to span from those who learned in the early period to those who have learned further out, and in some cases have actually been teaching very, very young children for many, many years. This is significant because we're talking about, over time, a spread of, I'm going to say, one initial teacher's lessons about how these principles operate in us, all the way to the present day and what's happening in Deb Bell's class. So I'm going to ask you to be very patient Sid sometimes would say that. Be patient with the language that we may use today, because for more than 20 years, in Menominee, Wisconsin, and nearby Boyceville, where Deb is from, the language for a system-wide initiative that has brought real change into the personal lives of adults and kids, and to some degree into the systems, has been health realization. Don't be worried about that. It's not about the words. Those words will crop up as Deb talks, because that is the language that was first used when we started teaching the principles there 20 years ago. Okay? And so you have grandfathers talking to grandchildren today, and all of the generations in between who have been in community-based trainings, and they've had to be able to talk to each other. So it's a simple thing about practicality. How have we handled the integration of the original language and the current language, and the in-between language of health realization? Today we're talking about the principles, and we do a tremendous amount of just interchanging all of those words. And in some ways that's important to recognize, because if we want to change education globally, for all time, one of the things that we have to be able to think is to realize that there are multiple generations that we're wanting to affect. And we have to do this in a way that it carries. So as we begin today, I really am excited to have you meet Deb Bell, who is yet one more expert, whose heart and life has been touched tremendously by the principles. And I'm going to unmute you, Deb, so that in a moment you'll be able to speak. One of the things I wanted to say about Deb before you begin is, by all traditional measures of professional educators, Deb is a consummate educator. And that doesn't mean she's better than anybody else. It just means she can tick off all the boxes that we would want an educator to be active in order to influence education for the long haul. And by that I mean she is actively, historically involved with her teachers' union at the local, district level, at the state level, and Wisconsin has had its bumps related to teacher unions and political realities. And she is active at the national, federal level. Deb is a resource person that has been called on for all kinds of things. And she's also one of these people, sometimes I think she got 3 shots of energy compared to my 1. She was just born running. I really think she was. And Deb, I remember having coffee with you, probably at Perkins in Menominee or wherever we were, after you had completed your first introductory training, which was spread over 3 months and 4 days total. And you were wound up. You were really ready to go. And I had casually mentioned, there's an option of signing up for a 1-credit independent study at the university. If any of you in the training want this, I'm happy to facilitate that. And it's just you and me, and we go forward. Well, Deb raises her hand. And she said, I want the independent study so I can create curriculum for students right away. That's pretty phenomenal. And then Deb, I don't know if you're going to remember this. Deb is the active person who does all kinds of things. You know what that is?
Oh, funny.
You begin and you can tell them how this came about.
I'm going to let you tell them just because I don't want to mess it up.
A beautiful shawl. Next card.
Just gorgeous.
Minnesota winters. She made it. And she was kind of working on one of these the day, it wasn't this specific one. She was working on another one during the coffee while she's talking about, I want the independent study so I can create curriculum. And that's Deb. She's got something going all the time. And just plain getting the time to prepare to be on this webinar was a real jigsaw puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So with all of that long introduction, I'm just going to welcome you, Deb, and encourage you to just go in whatever direction you would to introduce people to you and to your school system.
Thank you. I just have to say I presented Monday down in Janesville, about 4 hours away, 2 other presentations, leadership and governance, totally different from this. So, yeah, so I had a day in between to switch gears to this. So I do really appreciate Kathy and for all the, Gary and Kathy were the ones who pulled me into the training a long 20 years ago. And I just appreciate so much learning from them and all the trainings that they made available for us. I also want to take a moment and just thank Brett for all of his technical help and all the webinars and making sure everything's running well. He's done a great job. The third one I want to do is I just want to say I appreciate and value all those people, Krista and Marika and Barb, that have actually trained under Sid Banks and Roger Mills. It would have been cool to have met those people, but I do appreciate being able to learn under Kathy. And so I'm the 4th rung trying to teach to the 5th rung of students. So, but my name is Debra Bell, and I've been teaching in Boyceville for 32 years. Next year will be my 33rd. I am what they call a looping teacher, and I've mentioned it before possibly, but last year I finished up a 3rd grade class. Now I'm going back down to 2nd grade, and I'll be taking a group for 2 years now. So they'll stay with me for 2nd grade and 3rd grade. And it's a commitment that I make and the students make and the parents make, because they come in not knowing for sure. 2 years is a long time. So it's kind of an adventure that we go on, a 2-year adventure. And in those 32 years that I've taught, I've had 35 student teachers. Oh, my lights just, I'm sorry. You know what? Can you see me okay?
Yes.
In our school, if you don't move, the lights shut off. So if you can see me, I'll just stay.
You're fine.
Okay. In 35 years, I've had 35 student teachers in 32 years. Of those student teachers, 5 of them have been hired at Boyceville. So one of those student teachers, her name's Angela, was actually hired 20 years ago and asked me if I would be a looping teacher with her, if she could be a partner with me. And what that means is she's always opposite of me. So when I'm in 3rd grade, she's in 2nd grade. It's exciting because we always know it's a commitment, so we don't have to ask each other every year if we're switching. It just happens until one of us decides to leave or something changes. But so that's what a looper is. This year,
a question to clarify.
yes.
When you do the looping, that means that when you speak about switching, you in year 1 are assigned to 2nd grade.
Right.
And in year 2, you follow those kids to be 3rd graders, and you and your colleague have simply agreed that you're going to do that in advance. So these kids get you for 2 full years.
Right. And yes, and our classes, we've had SAGE program, which is our the state of Wisconsin before had a commitment to young classes, preschool, kindergarten through 3rd grade, to keep class sizes down. So class sizes usually are 15 to 18 students in the class. So it's just wonderful for us to have a small group of kids and be able to influence them for 2 years. So I compared every year my students from the beginning of 2nd grade to the end of 3rd grade, and there's such a huge change in those kids. But I also get 2 years to teach them health, to talk about health realization. And so I think that helps a lot. Now, the town I live in is called Boyceville. It's very rural. There's 404 students in this elementary, probably 850 at the most in the entire K through 12 school, preschool through 12th grade. Our school's K through 6. Our town has no grocery store. We only have a couple businesses in town, gas station that has something you can get to eat there. There's cleaning services, but there's not a lot here. Our school is the hub of the entire community. Everybody lives around the school. There's 8 townships in our school. So we have a 60-mile radius around Boyceville that we pick up kids and bring them in. So they have a lot of different addresses, a lot of different homes, and that really plays into them getting to know each other and understand each other. So sometimes when they come, they really don't know some of the kids, and it's a new experience for them. So I want to just back up in time, and then I'm going to go forward and talk about my classroom. But when I was born, I was in rural Wisconsin in a town called Viroqua, and it was named after a Native American princess, by the way, and I was the youngest of 5 kids. I had 20 aunts and uncles, and we did everything together. We did everything with the aunts, the uncles, the cousins. It was really important in our life. And also church was very important. And my family went to church all the time. They were, not just Sunday, but it was, my mom was Sunday school superintendent and all that. We did spend time when we weren't farming. We'd go boating and fishing and swimming, sliding, sledding. We were always together. I was told from a very, very young age that, and I'm telling you this because it's going to come up later in my classroom, but I was told from a very young age that whenever things get very troubling, or when you have problems in your life, you just lift that weight off you pray and you lift, and then that weight lifts off your shoulders. So whenever I was stressed, or whenever I didn't think I could go on, or if the burden was heavy, I just would take a deep breath, like I am right now, and then I would just lift all that stress off my shoulders, and it would go away. And all my life, that has been a spiritual part of me, and it was something that I was taught in the church. In my teaching career, I've taught so many different kinds of kids that don't know that and didn't have that. And of course, in school, you can't teach that. But I was just amazed when I went to Kathy and Gary's course, or their classes, and they were talking about the same thing. It's that spiritual mind, the mind, and how you can just let your thoughts go and focus on what's important, and not stay focused on a thought, but that they're constantly moving and changing. When I was in college, I remember that's when you're really stressed a lot. And I remember just that stress coming out and just taking that. I can still remember to this day that feeling of just breathing deep and letting go. And times when things are really stressful, that's how it all goes away, because then I can become clear. I can think about what I need to do next, and I can focus on what's really important.
Yeah. Deb, can I ask a question here? When you're talking about what you were taught and saying that it is a spiritual teaching that was a part of your life all along, I recall visiting with you about this, where you were saying, well, it was all about trusting the unknown.
Right. And that's exactly what it is. You trust that there's someone that you can let the stress go, and that it will be taken care of. That
Right.
In my world, it was God, and at the time it was God, and it was just a way of letting my spiritual mind take over and calm me down and calm my thoughts down. So,
and
yeah.
if I can add something here, this is an important piece because people who learn, all of us who learn the principles, come with various, I'll just say upbringings, various learnings in our lives. And it would be accurate to say that what was occurring in, and Gary, you can, verify this later if you wish, what was occurring in the community-wide trainings that went on in Menominee that Deb was an active part of all these years, always acknowledged from day one that inner life and the power of that to be our guide if we're talking about Krista's way of working in her recent curriculum. So the thought that there was something more than my intellectual head to figure things out, that I could trust the flow of life. And we have ways of talking about that, even though that was not necessarily articulated clearly in the psychological model for teaching the principles of the early day. Does that make sense? She's going to turn on the light, so we'll just chat a bit more.
Yeah,
You have public schools where, there are these automatic shutoffs. You don't move. If you treat it quietly, it gets dark. Okay, so take us on the journey a little bit further, Deb.
Okay, so like we talked about, I learned from Gary and Kathy. We went to a place called Bundy Hall, and I went to that training, and eventually it so intrigued me, I kept asking for more, that I became the coordinator for Boyceville. And we kept track of who was trained, and at one time we had 61 staff trained, and 32 are currently still teaching here at Boyceville. And they were all taught the principles, and they all learned about it. And we've done it in various stages in areas. But I think that 20 years ago when this started, it was an exciting way to come back to our school, and we could communicate with all these people about the principles. And I think that really has made our staff a unique school. We've become very close. 15 of us went to Vegas together. You don't find that happening with staff.
At our own expense yet.
Yes, at our own expense, on our own time. It was just a fun thing to do because we like to be around each other. And I think part of that is because we all have that same understanding. And when I was invited to that training, it just made so much sense that's when I mentioned to Kathy I wanted that 1 credit so I could start teaching it to my students right away. The students I have, a lot of my students in my class are challenging. They're challenged students. They've come from a really tough background, or their home situation isn't real wonderful, or they have Asperger's, or there's something, learning problems. But I mean, and I have all kinds of students, but I usually find those students. They usually come to my room. And I just learned that I have to listen and be very patient with them. And understanding. And I really appreciate, I think it was Krista that said, you just have to be there and present and take time to listen and understand them. And I think that's important, that to understand when you have the principles, it's easier to do that. Sometimes I see other teachers that may not understand that, and they don't listen as well. And you can just see that they don't understand that. So I think that's an important part of what I have. Another thing that really was wonderful after taking Kathy's class, we formed a curriculum and brought it back. And I asked the school board, the principal first, and the superintendent if they would accept the curriculum and make it part of our curriculum of our health in 3rd grade. We were teaching health at the time, and we were supposed to be teaching safety and mental health issues. So it worked. It fit perfectly. The school board accepted the curriculum, and I did note in the curriculum to be updated as we learn, So that's in there. Then 2 years ago, Paula Smith came on board, and she started coming in and co-teaching with me, which was awesome, because I think when you have someone coming into your classroom for a half an hour a week, every single week, you get more done and you stay consistently talking about it. And then in so we ended up teaching it a half an hour a week in second grade, a half an hour a week in third grade. And we consistently were adding and changing and making to fit the kids' schedules. Paula was really good about finding books. And somebody had mentioned last week a comment about, well, you can make any book and adjust it to the situation, and she's very good at that. And I have just a ton of books that we've used in the past 2 years that have helped us. There was a sense of urgency 20 years ago when I met Kathy that I had to get in and start doing this like immediately to help these kids that were just struggling. And I've done surveys, and I don't know if you can see this, but I have the surveys here, and I ask the kids, like, everyone is born with goodness inside, or I know how to listen, or if I don't like something, I stop thinking about it. And I do those surveys at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, and everything doubles. I mean, the kids do change throughout the years with their research, and I think I've kept every single survey that I've ever done. So I have a lot of those.
If I can add something here. Deb, as I said, was really an ideal learner in one way especially, and that is that he had this natural sense of urgency to get on with doing this, sharing it with children, which is true of people on this webinar. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have that too. But Deb listened very carefully to the kind of overall suggestions that would be made in training. And it happened that we were taking a systems view. And so we kept stressing, you've got to evaluate, you have to evaluate, you have to keep a record. And we said, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be sophisticated, but develop something so that you can say, when I started, it was like this, and when I came to the end of the school year, it was like that. Well, Deb took it serious and did it for 20 years. Now that's faithful learning. So please continue.
Yeah, we've spent the last 2 years really updating and changing things, and I was really excited to find Krista's curriculum also, that we're going to try and use that also and expand, because I think we needed a model to make sure that people continue this. So by having Paula come in and co-teach people, she went into, I was one of 3 third grade classrooms. I could tell them to teach it, and they might have gotten it, but to have Paula go in and teach it and have them watch the first year. Now this year, she's going into those 2 classrooms and she's having them teach it, and then she's there for support and mentoring. And she's expanding to a 4th grade classroom that she was trained in health resiliency before, but has never taught it in the classroom. So Paula will teach it this year, and then she will then be able to teach it from that. So we're kind of building from the bottom up, and hopefully we're going to keep moving up into the high school. We have a core group of people that are very active and want to keep talking about this. They called about February this year, the high school teachers did, and said, we need some support. I need a refresher. I need to talk about this. And so we started meeting at the local restaurant in Menominee, and we just started meeting once every couple of weeks and just started talking about the principles and how it's affected us and what's been happening in our lives. And they've really appreciated that. And now that group is hopefully going to expand and include more people as we go. And we also talked about possibly starting a parent group, because we have parents that they learn this from the kids. That, you know, I teach it to the kids. The kids go home, they start talking about it, and then they want to know more about it. And so we've had a few parents say, can I take a class in this? I want a class in this. I want to know what my, you know, so that's a possibility for this fall that we're working on it.
If I can interject something here, you hear her mentioning Paula, and Paula is listening in on this call today. So I hope when we get to questions that she may comment. But for those of you who don't know, Paula is doing this as a volunteer who retired as school psychologist from the Menominee school system. And there's a lot of retirees in a 20-year period who have been touched by the understanding. And it's a resource within school systems that should never be overlooked. It made a huge difference for Deb.
She's been phenomenal. It's been very helpful to teach this to the students. You know, I have some stories about kids, and one of them is just this little redhead girl with freckles and kind of she had a lisp, and just a really cute girl. And talking about Paula and I would notice with kids when they start noticing, when they start realizing that the principles are in action. This Amber was at lunch one day with her friends, and Megan said, I don't want this cracker. Would you guys like a cracker? And the two girls, Megan's friends, Amber and Aubrey, both said at the same time, I want the cracker. And Amber said, oh, go ahead. And Aubrey misheard her and started yelling at her, and they didn't know what was going on, and they started this fight ensued. They got onto the playground where I was, and I said, well, tell me what's going on. And they were trying to tell me about this cracker and how someone, you know, Megan offered it, and all of a sudden Amber just burst out laughing, just hysterically, and could not stop. And everybody stopped their arguing. Everybody stopped everything. And Amber goes, do you realize how ridiculous we sound that we're fighting over a cracker? Really? We're fighting over a cracker. And she just stopped and noticed and realized how crazy their thinking was. And actually, she had misheard Aubrey. Aubrey didn't hear her. And instead of asking again what they said, you know, they let their thoughts go to where they shouldn't have gone. So just a simple story like that we like to let the kids know, or the kids notice. They start noticing things like that after we've talked to them and taught them a few things. One boy I had, his name was Jesse, had an attachment disorder. And he was diagnosed before he came into my classroom. He came from Florida, moved in the beginning of the year. We start September 1. Can't start a day before. And he was ADHD, bipolar, had all these different things going on in his life. And in his files, somebody had actually written that this child, students with this disorder, attachment disorder, grow up to be serial killers, like Charles Manson and Doms. And I'm reading this, and my principal actually brought it to my classroom and said, look at this. And I went, I can't believe somebody would put this in a paper, in a Hume folder. And he had a lot of trouble. His parents, but I had him for 2 months, and I got to talk to him. He was hearing voices. He was hearing the light poles talk to him, that kind of thing. And I talked to him as much as I could about how our outside of us, you know, gets covered up with bad things happening, but on the inside, there's still that really good place inside of you that you can uncover and find and keep it and let it shine. And so on the last day, I asked him to take a test. I said, I want to know what you know, and I'll keep track, and I'll, you know, so you can stay focused and take the test. And at the end of the test, he said, you know what? He said, when I grow up, I'm going to get married. I said, well, that's great. That's wonderful. He said, well, when I get married, I'm going to have kids too. And I said, well, that's a wonderful thing. And he said, when I have kids, I'm coming back to Boyceville so that I can say, have my kids have you for a teacher. And I said, well, that's wonderful. I'm not going to be here, but I didn't tell him that. But I said, that's really wonderful. I said, why would you do that, Jesse? He said, I want my kids to hear you tell them that you had their father when he was in second grade, second grade. And I thought for an attachment disorder child to come and say that was pretty powerful and profound. It was just a wonderful story about how, and I only had him, his last day was October 31st. His dad would not let him stay for the party that afternoon because he'd been naughty, in his dad's words, and ran away from home. And so that was my last time I saw him. But someday, who knows, I might run into that child again and find out what happened to him.
In the resilience research, and especially the writing of Bonnie Bernard, she always had a pet line, very true statement, that the label of a diagnosis, supposedly,
Right.
was the greatest risk a child could endure.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
and the principles are there operating the entire time. And it requires that a teacher such as you sees through that diagnosis. I mean, you tossed the cume file mentally.
Right, right.
And proceeded to relate to the healthy child.
Right. And, I kept telling him he's healthy inside. He just, and he can be what he wants to be. He just needs to focus and keep his thoughts in a positive way. And hopefully that will help him in life. And who knows? You don't know what's going to happen there. But it's interesting to watch those kids and find out what happens to them. And and one of the things that I love to do is I love to follow those kids, the kids as they get older. And so I followed kids. Right now I have one that I think is a 8th grader, I think, this year. And his name is Tyler. And I'm going to be showing a video of Tyler in just a minute. But Tyler is one of those kids, when you tell him, he got it immediately. He knew what I was talking about. The sad thing about Tyler was Tyler fell on the day back from Christmas vacation on the equipment outside and got a concussion. So he was getting sick. I sent him home. I said, you need to go get this checked out. And they took him in for an MRI, and they called me on the phone, and they said, we're on our way to Rochester. Thank you for having us do this. He didn't have a concussion, but they found a mass on his brain, and he ended up in surgery that next day, having it taken out, and was back in the classroom in a week and a half like nothing had happened. The next year, I followed him through in 3rd grade, and that same student, he had 3 forms: Gardner's, cancer on his spine, and cancer in his brain they found the next year. He ended up having surgery again and chemo, and he ended up in St. Jude's. And I'll tell you what, he had the calmest presence of any person in that classroom. Through all that trauma and all that he went through, he got it. And he made sure those other kids knew too. I mean, he shared it. He shared what he knew. And it was such an exciting thing to see that somebody who was always going through this drama didn't let it define him. And then when somebody in the classroom was arguing over a pencil or something trivial, he would just look at them and say, really? There is so much more to life than that. And the kids would just go, oh my gosh, I do sound stupid. So it made those kids really, first of all, they were really close. And second of all, they looked up to him, and he was like a mentor to the kids too, or, he helped with the kids. I'd like to show you his video of just how when he would get stressed, like we all get stressed, but how he reacted to that. And I just have a 23-second video on Tyler I'd like to share with you.
Isabel's class. She taught me about things that clear my mind and make me in a better place. About yesterday, I was in the hospital and I decided to get freaked out. But then I started thinking and I cleared my mind.
He had a fear of those tubes, those MRI tubes that you have to go in, and you have to stay perfectly calm, and you can't move, and you can't say anything. And he said, I just cleared my mind. I just let myself breathe. I relaxed, and it was just fine. And that's the kind of thing that when those kids can bring those stories back to the classroom, and I have an entire video of him, and I've only been able to find that 23 seconds of it, but it's fun to watch how they handle the stress when they have the principals behind them, and how he can take that and use that. We were talking about how this spreads, and that urgency I have of teaching it and sharing it and letting others know about it. You don't always know when what you're doing and how it influences others. I had a student that he was kind of a dark person. He had it was one of those kids it was hard to read, and you didn't know what was going on inside, and you didn't know if what you were saying was affecting him. Because he didn't share. He was very quiet. But his mother kept coming in and asking questions about what I was teaching to the kids and how I was teaching it. And lots of questions. She always had questions. And I always answered them. And I never knew what she was thinking, really. I just kept sharing. And I thought it was very cool that as the years progressed, he was another student I had for 2 years. And as these questions kept going on, 2014, there was a 3 Principles Global seminar, seminar up in the Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I went to that with Gary and Kathy and Paula, and a group of us went up there to that. And the person who was sitting, you would never believe who was sitting in front of me in that next row, was Levi's mother, sitting in the row right in front of me. And she had told me, there go the lights, she had told me that what happened was after she left my class, she started seeking out classes to learn more about the 3 principles. So she had taken a class in Menominee. She had taken her dad and brought her dad in to learn the principles. And she had also had her sister come in. So she was at the 3 Principles Global Conference in Minneapolis with her sister, learning more about the principles. And I said, you just never know where it's going to go, what's going to happen next, or how far it's going to go. And that was one of the stories that it really made me understand that I have to just keep doing it and let people know, let children know, so that and now this last couple of years when we've done it, one of the things we focus on with the kids also is not only do you learn the principles and live the principles, but it's kind of your duty now that you know it to share it. And so that's also been kind of a new focus that we didn't have in the past, because I don't know if they left and never shared it. Maybe they did, but now it's kind of we say that it's kind of something you should share. And so some of my students that I had, actually, we wrote a story about the ABCs of our healthy core. And I don't know, I think I have to get up again and
Hold it up a little closer to the camera.
there we go. Sorry. I have to get my lights back on. This is the story of the 3 principles, and I'm not going to read the story. It's the ABCs of our healthy core. But here's just one of the pages. And this is Aiden, one of my students, who he put 3 boxes in there. You can see the gift boxes. And out of the gift boxes, he put thinker, noticer, and healthy core. And my kids, for some reason, really related to the healthy core as their star inside of them. And that's just how this group, that's how they connected with it. And that's what they like to use. So they draw pictures with their healthy star inside of them. And it was fun. But he wrote, E is for everyone, everywhere with these 3 gifts. Everyone is born a thinker, a noticer, and has a healthy core, which is always there. It's important for us to share our gift with others. So I thought that was just a wonderful way to have him, and that's just one of them. There's in the whole alphabet. There's I think this is my other one. It's a mind, and it's got 60,000 thoughts in it. And it also has, I calm down when I breathe inside of the brain. And then over here it says, I like feeding my mind healthy things like helping others, eating healthy foods, being good, exercising our mind, and being healthy every day. And just the whole entire book, it's ABCs, so there's one for every letter of the alphabet. We kind of coordinated the A's, the B's, what they would say. And then the kids then wrote what it meant. And it was sort of an evaluation of the 2 years. Like, what did you learn over these 2 years? I want to know what's inside your mind and what are you thinking. And so this studenttreasures.com, actually they mail you a kit, and the kit has the lines on it. So when you get the lines, you can get a page that's blank, and then you get a page of lines. And every time you do it, the kids get the page, you finish it up, you send it back to them, and then they give you this book that's hardcover, and it's got a bound, and it was $20 per person, and per book. And Paula goes to a Dunn County Coalition with Gary and Bonnie and a lot of people in Menominee. There's clergy, there's people from the hospital, there's people from all over the town, the Stout, our university. And she was telling them about this project we were working on with the books. And they were so excited about hearing that the kids were writing a story about our healthy core and the 3 principles. And she said, after she got done talking, one of the people came up to her and said, this is so important. She wrote out a check for $400 and said, here, take this and make sure every child in that class gets their own book. So every single child got their own book. And I had parents that were buying multiple books so that they could give it to the aunt or the uncle or the cousin or and there's still a number you can buy it from today. So
if I can just make a comment here, because this is so typically Deb. The book started as a way of having students thank Paula for volunteering her time and saying what they had learned. And then if I understand correctly. But when Deb sent me the first copy of the book, she had a great big Post-it on it. And she said, some of these are good, some are not, but just know we didn't proofread this at all. And the point is children telling their story as they see it, and Deb viewing it as evaluation of the progress they're making, and then parents getting in the act and just wanting to purchase. So I'm going to remind us all of the time. We have about 40 minutes left. Yes. So I'm wondering, Deb, if you have a student story that you want to continue with?
Yes, I have one more story that I'd like to share with you. This story is his name is Camden. And Camden was in my classroom for 2 years. Camden is now 20. Sorry, he's 20. But when he was in 2nd grade and I taught the principles to the class, I encouraged the kids to come up with their own way of connecting and making it theirs. And I would be sitting there watching Camden in class, and all of a sudden Camden would be sitting there working on something, and he'd be going, choo, 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 choo. And I sat and watched him for quite a while, for almost a week. And then I finally went up to Camden and I said, what are you doing when you are choo-chooing all the time? What is that, And he goes, well, how you told us that we have to let our thoughts go?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Do you have the video of this?
Yes.
And
Should I show the video before I talk about it?
Yeah, because the video is beautiful.
Okay. So I actually, fast forward to his senior year, I did an interview with him, and I like to interview my students that I had and ask them, what do you remember about the principles from 2nd and 3rd grade? What do you remember about? And I interviewed him, and I have a 6-minute video of him telling, and I kind of had to prep him and get him talking. He's kind of shy, but it's a video about Camden and what his thoughts were and how he's progressed through the years. So I'll let you see that.
And today I'm here interviewing Camden Casey. Camden was in my classroom 10 years ago, and I'm here to ask him to tell his story about how he uses health realization in his life and how he learned health realization in the classroom. So Camden, do you remember anything from back in 2nd, 3rd grade? That was 10 years ago. It's a long time ago.
Yeah, quite a while.
Could you tell me anything you remember about learning the principles and your thought process back when you were in that age?
Oh, I remember you teaching about it,
Okay.
but for some reason I just thought of making up my own and just using that.
Which is awesome. I encourage you to do that.
Yeah, and I just...
Can you tell them what your idea was?
It was this choo-choo train that came along, and every time I was stressed out or had a lot on my mind, I would put all my thoughts, all the bad thoughts at least, onto that train, and I'd send it away so that I could focus on important things that I needed to do.
It's funny, I remember when you were in 2nd grade and you would be sitting there doing work and all of a sudden you'd be going choo 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 choo. And at first I didn't understand because I knew I had taught health realization, and then after talking with you it was like, oh, that's what he's doing. So it was really fun that you came up with your own idea to learn to deal with stress. That was awesome. Do you remember a time when you were stressed, how it worked? Can you tell me of a time?
Yeah, there was one time I was visiting my family in Iowa, and there was a project that we had to do and a lot of homework for each class that I had, and I didn't do any of it.
You were done with Grandpa and Grandma having fun.
Yeah, I was with my family.
I miss them.
Yeah,
I've
they're
seen them
nice.
a long time.
And yeah, I didn't do anything. And I came back and I was just loaded with a bunch of homework.
Right.
And it was crazy, and I was stressed. I was almost in tears probably at one point, and I actually drew it out, the train, and I wrote down everything that was stressing me out. And I crumpled it up in a little ball and I sent it away, almost like the train was going away.
That's awesome.
And for some reason it just worked.
It worked.
It just worked for me when I was young.
So you used it quite a bit when you were young.
Yeah, it was great.
That's awesome. And that story was it hit home so much with me that one time Jack Pransky, who's the author of What is a Thought is a Lot, he liked that story so much that he put it into the book, and Camden's story is lesson 5, I think, in the disc in the back of the story of what happened with the train. So I think we need to fast forward then after you left 2nd and 3rd grade. This book came out, and it came out kind of not so good of a time for you. It was right when your mom was really sick from cancer, and I almost didn't even bring it to you because I felt so bad that you were going through that. I didn't want to bother you when that time came, and I was kind of asked to do it anyway, and I said, well, I can do that. And do you remember what happened when I brought this up and asked you to tell your story in the book? Do you remember what happened?
Well,
Can you tell us?
I was pretty excited, actually. I was like, well, this is really nice. I can help out other people,
That's
help
awesome.
out you and help out kids
It's great.
throughout,
So your dad came in and said that was pretty special for your mom. So that's really cool. Did that reviewing of the principles help you get through when your mom passed away?
It did, actually, a lot.
This came right at the right time, didn't it?
It really did.
Sometimes things happen. It's funny how that happens. But I remember your dad telling about you. He called your grandparents in Iowa to tell him about the story. Do you remember anything about that?
Somewhat. I mean, it was a little while ago, but they're pretty happy
They were
about it.
excited
Yeah,
about that. He said that when you came home with that idea, he called them and told your grandparents and your aunt.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it came back around that it was in the story, he called them again and told them you were going to be in the story. And that was like a precious moment for your mom. So that was pretty cool that that happened at the time it did. So I guess what I'd like to know today is, how do you use those? I'm sure you don't use the train anymore, but how do you do that now? Growing up, you're a senior, you're graduating, you're going on. How do you? Has it changed? Do you still use it? What do you do now?
I guess in a way I still use it. You know, I try to isolate each problem that I have. Kind of like the train, you know, I just throw everything on the train, and the most important thing I would keep in my head, what I have to do, and I'd send that train away. You know, I kind of do that now, you know, naturally.
Naturally,
I
it
don't
doesn't
even
need the train anymore.
Yeah, it's
just,
almost like I adapted to it, and I just keep using it. I don't even have to use the train; it just goes to my head right away.
so it's kind of become internal now.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. So what are your plans from here when you graduate?
I kind of want to go to college.
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Where are you thinking about going?
I might just maybe CVTC, Stout, or the Cordon Bleu.
Awesome. I heard you wanted to be a chef.
Mm-hmm. That'd be fun.
That would be really fun. So someday maybe you'll come back to my classroom and make something when you're a chef.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe.
That would be cool.
That would be nice.
That would be fun. Well, I hope you continue to use this throughout, and I'm glad that you were in the book and that we got to talk today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It's fun. Thank you.
That was his story. I'm glad you said just play it right away. I forgot I already had that story on there.
A couple of things about this that everybody listening may wonder, how is it that Deb can be even talking about these students' stories and filming them and making them available globally? And I told you, she was a faithful learner. At the beginning, I had stressed not only document, but get permission. And so the other day, when we were preparing for this webinar, I said, now, Deb, do you have permission for these videos? And she said, I have permission for every student I've ever taught to use their name, anything they said, and anything about their experience signed by their parents. She started it day one and kept that. So she's got a legacy of available information, and that's special. We need to do that kind of thing in order to get the story out. If somebody wants to write a book, you cannot include such stories without. So is there another student story that you might wish to share, or are we ready to move to another area?
No, all I wanted to say was that Camden's now in Scottsdale, Arizona, and he's going to college. So he's doing very well, and he keeps in touch. And it's just a wonderful story that I love to share with people, because it's just one of those kids that, and I have a lot of stories, but I don't know, his was kind of special. And I think part of that, getting the signatures, was from when Camden, we had to get his Jack Pransky, permission. That kind of helped me remember, to get other kids too. It's like, why not get everybody's? Then I don't have to worry about it.
You had a proper form for collecting those.
Yes, I did. And I learned that from Jack. Actually, you and Jack helped me with that. Yeah. So that was wonderful. Yeah.
One of the things that was delightful for me as I'm sitting here listening to your video of Camden, I have a small screen of you watching that video. And what I want to highlight is how much pleasure successful educators can take and experience time and time again when we reflect back on the impact that has been visible, made aware, of with the students that you've worked with. It was just like watching somebody who had gotten a Christmas present. I mean, you lived this. But so often educators do not know the rest of the story.
Right.
You know, somebody comes back years later. So this business of documentation, even on an iPhone, one of these was nothing more than a little 20-second clip. But Deb made it a point to meander over to the high school and start asking kids on the 10-year anniversary, because that's the year they're going to graduate. She had them in second or third grade, both grades. So it's a delightful story of what I call realistic and impactful data tracking. It's not research yet, but it is the fodder from which we make an argument that somebody should fund us to do some other things.
Mm-hmm.
And we need that in the whole of the three principles community, in my opinion. At this point, Deb, is there something more that you'd like to share that you haven't yet covered? And if not, we can begin to ask participants to pose their question.
The only thing I want to add is that I think from all of this happening, and you know, we started presenting. Paula and I have presented a couple times about this at our union asked us to present, so we went down and we presented a couple times now. I think one of the things that I find that I think is interesting to me is when you're in that calm state of mind, or when you do things that you don't normally think you can do. I just find in the last 5 years, and maybe it's because I've been doing more with the kids with this, the more I find myself in a good place or in a calm place, the more I do things that I don't like doing this particular thing. I never in a million years would have thought I would have been on a video for 2 hours or an hour and a half, you know, talking about this. Or one time I had to present to the Joint Finance Committee in the state legislature, and I had to get up and speak to them. Those are the kinds of things that I think only can happen if you're in a calm, clear state of mind. And I think if the kids learn that, that's how they become that's how they learn their best, and the best comes out in them. And I guess that's where I see, you know, that urgency comes from, that they have to know this, so they do their best and their best comes out.
And you know, the simple foundation here is that it's going back to that very foundation of understanding the principles that are operating inside of us. And that just naturally, shall I say, spins off the calm experience, or the peace of mind, or the comfort with the unknown, the willingness to just keep in touch with that part that is forever feeding us and being our health. So at this point, I'm going to invite participants to simply, you know, use the raised hand option. And if I don't see someone raising right away, I naturally am going to call on you. You've learned that I always do that. And at this point, I'm about ready to light on Marika, if that would be all right. And I always have to figure out your code, but there you are, Marika. What are you feeling? What are you feeling?
Wonderful. I'm just loving what I'm hearing from you, Deb. You're just such an example of those principles in action. You know, I see it in your eyes, your enthusiasm, and it kind of melts the rings that Kathy was talking about earlier. It doesn't matter where we are, you know, in the rings or who we've learned from. When you understand what it is, we're all together.
You're right. I agree. It puts you all in the same place.
You bet. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you're just such an example of that. I love it. So thank you.
And isn't it amazing that here can sit Marika and Deb talking to each other. And this is something like 40, 45 years after Sid started the discussion of how the principles operate inside of us. And this is amazing. It's not the only way that one can talk about the principles, but we can relate to each other. It's quite beautiful. Another person that might like to comment, or Joel, could I call on you? And Joel, I'm unmuting you. I know that you do what I would call community-based work to hopefully one day impact schools and youth programs. What pops into your head today that you might want to share with us?
Thank you for inviting me into this discussion. Actually, this is very helpful because this afternoon I'm going to talk to the staff of this organization I just got turned on to and had a meeting with one person there yesterday. They work with youth who've been through the juvenile justice system here in the LA area. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to reduce the recidivism rate. And so I just popped in. I had a brief appointment with one of the staff people there, and I was able to explain to him about the principles. And tears came to his eyes.
Oh, wow.
And he said, "You may not know this, but this is what you've been working towards wanting to make happen. And you found a place where I can't remember his exact words. There's tremendous opportunity." So he's inviting me in to talk to his staff today. But he also he laid out some of the challenges in terms of the students that are, or the youth who are coming there. You know, some are attentive, some are troubled, some come with some come to these classes high. They come in all different ways, shapes, and forms, and they find this place where they're not being judged, and so he was laying out the challenges that I might face. And just watching your persona, your enthusiasm, and your reminders about the listening that you underwent, and then watching how you are with your students in these videos. I don't know that there's something that I can articulate what I took from today.
Right.
But I feel like there's been a spiritual transference of watching you that I want to take this with me when I go to talk to the staff today and bring this in. I'll be talking to one class next Wednesday, and this is valuable. I'll probably go back to some of this and watch it again before I go into that.
Lovely.
Setting.
Awesome. Thank you. That's awesome.
I want to point out one interesting little piece here. Here sits Deb Bell in a school district of about 800 students, K-12. And Joel is going into a Los Angeles organization with what we would call very high-risk youth. And he's talking about what he's learning from Deb Bell today. Isn't that interesting?
It's very cool.
It's already there. It's just reinforcement, of course. But yeah, thank you. Another person that who might like to speak, and let's see here who we've got. Martin and Bob, I may call on you. I'm seeing that you are maybe just listening by audio, but for now, I'm going to unmute you, Krista. And if you have something you might like to pursue.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to finally meet you, Deb.
You too.
I feel like we're friends for some reason.
I do too.
Good. I have two beautiful little grandsons. They're just going into grade 1, but I'd love them to be in your grade 2 class. You know, it just sounds like home. It just feels amazing what you're doing. I love right from the very beginning of your talk when you spoke about how your upbringing and you were taught how to lift a weight and how important that is, and how you're able to teach the children that, maybe using different words but the same idea. And I just love how it's how you're a learner too. I love that. And that obviously shows in your face and in your joy of how you're living your life. But see that we're really all in the same boat, all moving forward. And I just love hearing the collaboration and how, the high school teachers are interested. So you and some other people made it happen, that there's an opportunity to discuss this, and also, seeing, that child's a bit quiet, what is on their mind, and that wonderful curiosity that teachers have and hopefully have throughout their whole career. But I just love how you've taken it a step further, well, quite a few steps further, rather than just a casual comment, that it's actually, like you say, in a book or on a video. It's so powerful, so beautiful. Good on you.
Thank you. It's funny you mention that, because every time we start a new 2 years, I always tell the kids that this is their new school home, and this is their community of learners, and we're going on an adventure that no one else can be part of. It's just 15 of us, 16 of us, and the people that come in share that journey with us. But as we go through the journey, once they leave, they can never replace that. It's just a memory, and we talk about how that experience is just what it is. You just can't replace it. So,
and it's so beautiful how you have the proof of how that stays with them, and it really was, pivotal in their lives, learning this, and how useful it is, no matter what age we are. And I also loved, I was kind of curious. I'm glad it was clarified who this wonderful Paula person is.
Oh, Paula.
Yeah, just fabulous. I mean, I'm a retired volunteer in the classroom as well, and it's just so beautiful to hear how a precious 1/2 hour per week is just can be so powerful. Obviously, it gets highlighted again and again throughout the day, but to focus direct teaching for such precious little time and to get those results, I just, again, it was just really a pleasure to hear about all of it. Thank you.
She's very dedicated. She comes in right around noon, and she does 3 half-hour sessions. So there goes the lights. She's just a rock star. It's awesome to have her there.
Wow, that's fabulous. So thank you, and nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you.
I'm going to alert you, Bob Shell, that I'm going to ask for a question in a minute, and I will unmute you. And Paula, I'm giving you a heads up that I'm going to try to get your voice to come on if you're able to speak. I know you're not videoing today, so we'll try that after Bob speaks. And Bob, you are unmuted. Would you offer a comment today? You're always so wonderful to do that.
Well, I just think it's absolutely beautiful to think of all these young children coming through a school system like this, Deb, and having this experience, and they just take this throughout their entire life. Wouldn't it be wonderful if every child had 2 years to experience this sort of thing, and what it would mean to them? I also thought it was interesting when you were talking about how, in your background and so forth, how your religion and so forth allowed you to calm down and just kind of resolve issues and so forth. And what an important thing that is, and what an important background to have that, so that when somebody does learn about the principles, they really know what you're talking about. They don't need to, go in and try and figure this out, because they've already been able to calm down and either use prayer or meditation or whatever it is that they do to calm down. And then it's like we're all the 3 principles. It's a matter of just understanding it, and it's an explanation of how life works. And so when people have it explained to how life works, they actually see that they've been doing this all along. And it just makes sense. And I had somebody the other day say to me, boy, I'd listened to all these different people that had these spiritual things, Eckhart Tolle and, some of these other people. And I thought, wow, they just really know what's going on. I'm sure there's something there, but I don't know what it is. And once you learn the three principles, you know what this is. And when you hear these things, you know what they're talking about. But what a beautiful thing it is to be able to share this at such a young level with kids. And then to see how many, for all the years that you've done this, to see all the lives that you've impacted, not just, all teachers do this, but you obviously have a special way of doing it that goes beyond the average person. So thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to speak.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. It makes you not want to quit because you want to keep sharing. I don't know how long I can do it, but it's fun to share with those kids and teach them.
It makes retirement a very hard decision.
It does. It really does.
Until we realize retirement only means the money stops.
Yes, that's true.
Go on teaching and sharing and leading and giving away, and we just call it charitable service. So, Paula, I'm going to unmute you. If you can hear me, would you simply speak up?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can see you as well. So I don't know what's going on with my connection, but
no problem. Please give us your comments.
Oh boy, where to start? Deb had the most beautiful structure in place by getting these lessons as part of her curriculum. And that is profound because there's buy-in from the principal, from other teachers. This has moved quickly and absolutely in a wonderful, fun way, because I don't even know how much we stick to that original curriculum anymore, but things go faster based on the moment of coming into the classroom. A lot of times, because Deb and these other teachers have embedded this in their day, we may not even get past talking about things, how the principals have worked in these kids' lives over the last week. Which has been profound. I also—
By that, Paula, can I ask a question?
Sure.
By that, at the beginning of each of your half-hour sessions each week with the kids, you're asking them to reflect back on what has happened to them, right?
Yeah.
In some form.
It gets somehow into the half hour. A big part of this coaching, going into these other classrooms, is that I have those teachers tell me about things, because they need to be more than just a listener, and they notice a lot. There's always something to talk about. I usually have a lesson plan, which is the advantage of being someone extra coming in, is that I usually have some kind of lesson plan. Whether or not it goes that way, is always interesting. The other part of it is this support with teachers at all levels is really important, because it is how people internalize and use the principles and have regular support. And I really wish we could extend this up somehow. We're working on a lot of things, but again, you can use just about anything going on in your classroom to illustrate the principles if you are in the right state of mind and are listening. And that's what makes this so fun. It's a treasure trove of new experiences and stories every week. And the kids are the best at that, actually. But the parents too, it's profound to have a parent call me and say, I got to know what's going on, because my son Alan is so different right now, and we're not having the same types of fights at home. And so in 10 minutes on her lunch break, teaching her the principles was a really fun way of doing this. And so I think, it's just a really good place to begin with, a good school. There's many teachers that know and understand the principles, and it's just bringing it out in them, pointing it out. And it's very rewarding that teachers have asked us to extend this to their classrooms. I haven't been out there saying, oh, I can come in and do this. It's teachers have come to Deb and said, is there any way we can get this in our classrooms? So that's been really powerful as well.
There's so much that we could talk with Paula about. One thing I would underscore is that Boyceville, as this tiny very poor transient community is nearby to Menominee and had the invitation from Menominee when they got their first grant that actually went something like 17 years, that Boyceville could just be part of their community trainings and so on. So when Deb talked about there being about 60 staff in the school district that were trained over time, and still about 30 or 35 are still teaching and working in that school district, you've got both good news that there are knowledgeable people and things have been happening K-12 in a variety of ways depending on what teacher one got. And secondly, it points to the real issue of systems change. How do you plan for natural transition? You know, what happens after Deb retires and has volunteered as much time as she can, and finally she says, I can't even volunteer anymore. Maybe by then she's 90, you know. But the point being, we have to have educators viewed as a renewable resource. We've got to keep planning for the next generation. It is not uncommon in this Menominee Boyceville community to have children grow up, have their own children, and bring their kids into the classroom, such as Deb was talking about. But to also hear children now as adults and parents come back and tell their stories, or even grandparents doing that. This is why a focus on school systems is one big part of the way that we impact education. When we do it from the outside alone, we get wonderful resources, but we're still left with the employees inside of that school system. And in most communities, small and medium size, the largest business in the community, as Deb says, they're the hub of everything. And it doesn't matter what happens in the community, they light in the school for solutions. That's where meetings occur, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Deb, we have about 3 or 4 minutes, and I'm wondering if you would like to make a closing statement.
Well, I have like 3 different things I want to do, but one of them is a lesson. One of the lessons we teach the kids, and I always start with a book called On the Day You Were Born, and that's like our favorite starting point at the beginning of 2nd grade. And it's just a really good book because it talks about how you were all born a good person and healthy. And it's just a wonderful book that I got for my daughter the day she was born. And then after that, we go into, we talk about an apple and how sometimes apples get beat up and bruised, and things happen to them, and they might not have a wonderful outside. They might be bruised and beat up, but you know, each one of us are just like this apple, and if you cut into the apple, maybe I can't. No, here we go. If you cut into the apple, you can find that there's a star inside of every apple. No matter, can you see it?
Yeah, push it up a little bit more.
That there's a star inside of every apple, and no matter how bad you beat that apple up, that star is still going to be inside that apple. And so what we do is we show the bad, the bruised, the wrinkle, the icky apple on the outside, but then we show the inside, and that it's still there. That star is there no matter what happens. And sometimes you know, we just have to uncover that star and find it again. And I got a quote from Sid Banks that said, words are merely form. Listen not to the words, but to that which words attempt to convey. Remember, it's not the clay that represents the sculpture, but the form the artist has molded it into. Just the clay, just like this clay sculpture, thought is not reality. However, our personal realities are molded via our thoughts. At the moment of birth, the virgin mind discovers creation, and duality of life is born. Hence, you live in a world governed by thought. When clarity and purity of thought are present, the answers you seek will present itself. what you seek is with you and has always been with you. In the silence of our mind lies creative incubation, bringing the wisdom and the joy we all seek. And the other part I wanted to just say was, it is hidden in the depths of your soul. This is why such knowledge can only be found through an insight from one's own inner wisdom. Everyone in this world shares the same innate source of wisdom, but it is hidden by the tangle of our own misguided personal thoughts. So hopefully we teach those kids to untangle those thoughts and find their own personal wisdom. So that's my story.